Buongiorno. Welcome to Alan's Italy, show number 141. This show is going to focus on a day and a half that I spent in Milan back in the year 2002. And here's the story. In the year 2001, 2002, and even into 2003, I was traveling to Italy on my own. This particular trip in 2002, I started in Rome, spent about 10 days in Florence, then went to Venice, and the intent was to then take the train to Milan, where I would fly home from Malpensa Airport. So I was planning on spending a lot, I think 3 or 4 days in Venice, then get to Milan, where I would I'd get to Milan very late, and I would stay there I'd get there maybe 4 or 5 in the evening, have a fast dinner, go to sleep to get up early the next morning. So I was planning on spending really no time in Milan. I had been there before. I'd gone to a few places. I never really enjoyed Milan the way I enjoyed other places in Italy, other big cities. Okay, so that was the plan. While I was in Venice, the idea was to see Venice, but also to take a side trip to Verona. So I would say that the the day before my last day in Venice, I decided to go to the train station. And in those days, if I wanted to get a train ticket, I would go to a travel agency. So there was a travel agency right next to the train station in Venice. And I was walking up the steps of the travel agency, and people were coming down looking very disturbed. They were Americans. I spoke to them. I said, what's going on? And they said that there's going to be a train strike. Okay, so you know something? I think it was my last day in Venice. That's what it was. It was my last day in Venice, and it was early in the morning. So it was like 9 in the morning, and I was going to, go to Verona, come back, and then the next day I would be going to Milan late in the day. So that was really the idea. So I said, when is this train strike supposed to be occurring, and how long is it lasting? And they were completely flummoxed. I went into the travel agency and spoke to a representative who told me that the train strike was planned for probably within the next 3 hours. And train strikes are kind of a spontaneous thing. You never know how long they're going to last, and you don't know what's going to be affected. But it really could mess up a person's plans. So, I said, well, gee, if I go to Verona and spend the day, I may not be able to get back to Venice. Or if I get back to Venice, you could take a bus, from Verona back to Venice. But then maybe the next day, I wouldn't be able to get to Milan. Anyway, the whole thing just bothered me tremendously. And on the spot, I said, I'm leaving Venice right now. And actually, it wasn't right then, because I would have to go back to my hotel, get my luggage, and then go back to the train station. So I requested a train ticket, and I said, "What's the next train?" In those days, it was not quite as frequently, most likely. So I believe that I made the plans for maybe, it was 9 o'clock, so maybe like a 12 o'clock train to Milan, which would then take about 2 or 3 hours to get to Milan. So I immediately went back to my hotel, got my luggage, got on the train. Well, first I had called up the hotel that I was staying in Milan. So in those days, I used to stay at a hotel called the Hotel Gritty. It was a small hotel. It was on a piazza, and there was a restaurant right next door, a pizzeria. So I used to eat there a lot. And I liked the hotel. It was small. It had a little lobby. It had a little breakfast in the morning. And I knew the people there, so it was like the people behind the desk. So I liked going there. I felt, I'm alone in Italy, so you try to in a town where I know nobody, which was Venice, also. So you know, so I decided to get there early on that day, spend the rest of the afternoon in Milan. Then the next day, I would have a whole day in Milan, as opposed to just spending a few hours. I actually have an entire day in Milan, and then the next morning, I would take the train to Malpensa Airport to go home. So while I'm on the train, I really knew nothing about Milan. I had a very limited knowledge of it, and I'd only been there. This is my seventh trip, I believe, to Italy, and I had been to Milan maybe three times, and I did not do very much during those three times. So I didn't know much, but I did have a tour book with me. And on the train, on the way to Milan, I made a plan for the day and a half, a little less than a day and a half, that I'd be spending in Milan. And that's what the theme of this show is going to be, my day and a half of going to Milan. And once again, it's not going to be, and usually I use this disclaimer for all the times I do tours of various places. It's not going to be totally complete like a travel guide would be. It's going to just focus on, and this is even less than that because this is simply what I did over. It was even less than a day and a half because I wasn't getting to Milan until like 3:30. I wouldn't get to my hotel till like 4, so I really didn't have that much time. But late afternoon and then the whole day. And my plan was to keep myself occupied. Whenever I travel to Italy alone, the idea is always to keep myself as busy as possible. I had a tendency to get, kind of lonely and anxious and depressed about being places alone. In Florence, I had my friends, but when I was in Rome or Venice or Milan now, I would be totally alone and I would have to occupy my time. So my idea was to plan this period of time where I would be totally occupied, and this show is going to focus on that concept. So here it is. This is, I wouldn't even say a day and a half in Milan, probably even less than that. But this is what you're going to be seeing. So here I was in Milan, and the map you're looking at covers the inner area of the city, what might be called Centro. And if you look at the area I'm now showing, that is where my hotel was located. So right next to the Ambrosiana is where my hotel was. And the first day that I was in Milan, I had gotten there late in the afternoon. The hotel owner told me that there was a tour of La Scala, so I immediately went to that and then spent the rest of the evening in the Piazza del Duomo area, going into the cathedral, hanging around. I'll talk about this in a few moments, and then dining at the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele, which is a giant mall, a very beautiful mall. I'll get to that in a moment, more specifics. The next day, I had quite a trip planned. I had an appointment at the Church of Santa Maria delle Grazie. You see that off to the left. So I had to plan my day around that. I don't remember what time I had that appointment for to see Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. However, I started at the Ambrosiana, um, and there was something I wanted to see there. Directly to the Church of Santa Maria delle Grazie to see Leonardo's Last Supper. I then went to the Castello Sforzesco to see another painting, rather sculpture that I was interested in. And I then went to the Brera, which is the number one art museum in Milan, and from the Brera to the Pol di Pizzoli. So you see the sequence that I took that day to go to those 5 sites. And I'll tell you exactly in a few minutes what I did after that. But that is how I spent my day and a half in Milan, and I'm now going into specific details of the places I visited. So, as I said, on day one, I arrived at my hotel, walked across the Piazza del Duomo, which you're looking at right now, but had to continue on because there was some sort of a special tour that was going on at La Scala, the opera house, which was right behind the gallery. So I went there first, and got a tour and saw the museum and got a chance to see inside La Scala. And I was only there a brief time, maybe a half hour, and then immediately went into the piazza, which is an amazing place. I'm there alone. I'm in Italy alone, in Milan alone, and I went to this piazza, and it was a real happening place. There were street musicians. There were photographic sessions occurring for brides and grooms, and there were all kinds of performers going on. Very, very exciting place to be. And I spent time there. Went inside the cathedral. It's a magnificent cathedral. I did not go to the top. I don't do those kinds of things. But if you did want to go to the top, this is a view from the top of the cathedral looking at the piazza. It's quite a scene. So I left that piazza at the dinner hour, went inside the Galleria, which is a beautiful shopping plaza with retail stores that had probably closed by that time, but there were a couple of cafes, and I dined in one of them. So I chose one of the places, sat, and had some dinner. I believe that the table itself was right on the main area, the outside of the Galleria, and that was pretty exciting. And by that time it was around 8:39, and I went back into the piazza. If you don't want to be alone, that's the place to be. I spent time there. I sat on one of the monuments, and I pretty much stayed there until about 10, and then went back to the hotel. And that's how I spent my first late afternoon, early evening in Milan. What was interesting about day two was that I went to a number of different places, as I explained to you. And what's interesting is that in those different places that I visited, there was basically one thing I was interested in. So the hotel, as I said, was just above the Ambrosiana. And I had maybe a 5-minute walk from the hotel to the Ambrosiana, which is it's an art museum. But there was only one thing that I was really interested in, and that was the cartoon or the sketch that Raphael had completed before of the School of Athens before he actually went to the Vatican to do what is now known as the Raphael rooms in the area just above the Sistine Chapel. And that was a work that was a series of works that he did for Pope Julius II. And, eventually, of course, the School of Athens was the result. So I went to this one room with the cartoon right there, benches so you could sit and stare for as long as you'd like. That was fun. And that's really all I saw. I should mention that the reason I was so fascinated by the cartoon of the School of Athens was because the cartoon does not contain that figure you see in the front. See the figure in the front of the person leaning on a block of cement and sort of doodling? That's Michelangelo. And the cartoon did not contain that. So the story is that Raphael originally created the cartoon without Michelangelo represented. Now, a lot of very famous artists are represented in this painting, but Michelangelo was not. But when Raphael started working on the actual School of Athens um, in the Vatican, he went down to see the Sistine Chapel that Michelangelo was working on, was so impressed by it that despite his misgivings, he put Michelangelo in the actual painting of the School of Athens. So, I've seen the actual School of Athens in the Vatican, and I looked at the cartoon and I said, wow, that is really an interesting thing. I went directly to the Church of Santa Maria delle Grazie, where I had a reservation. The way they work it is they take your reservation, you are placed in a room, you go from one room to another room, and you wait with a bunch of people, and when the time comes, they let you in to see the Last Supper for maybe 10, 15 minutes. So, they let small groups in of people, and I was in there. No photography is permitted. So again, I sat, I believe, on a bench, or maybe I just stood there and stared at one of the most famous pieces of art in Western civilization. So I did that, left that, and headed directly to the Castello Sforzesco. As I went there, I passed, as you could see, the Piazzale Cadorna, which is where I got the train the next morning to get to the airport. You can get a train right there, and that takes you directly to the airport. So obviously that was very convenient for me. But I went into the Castello. This is where the Sforza family lived. The Sforza family were the de facto rulers of Milan in the Middle Ages. Each city-state and each of the cities was kind of a self-contained country in a sense. So Milan was a city-state that was run by the Sforza family, and this is where they lived. Now they have art exhibitions, one of which you're now looking at. But what I was interested in was a Michelangelo sculpture known as the Rondinini Pietà. This is the last Pietà, and indeed the last sculpture, that Michelangelo was working on before he died at the age of 89 in 1564. And this is a wonderful opportunity to see a Michelangelo sculpture with nobody, literally nobody else around. So it was amazing. Once again, though, I went to my third place in a row just basically to see one piece of art. And that's what I focused on when I was at the castle. I left the castle, still had not eaten lunch yet, and walked to the Brera, which is the main museum in Milan. The only thing I remember is the outdoors. There was an equestrian statue that was sculpted by the famous sculptor Marino Marini. Other than that, I really don't remember much of what I saw. There's some famous works of art, but I didn't know much about the Brera. I walked around as a tourist who had never been in a museum. Oh, there was a painting by Mantegna. You're looking at it now, which blew me away. I thought this was really a magnificent piece and really at the cutting edge of art during the Middle Ages. And, I found it interesting, but by that time I was pretty hungry, and I left the Brera and found a place to eat, probably in the area between the Brera and the Pol di Pizzoli, which was the next stop that I was going to, somewhere I believe along the Via Manzoni. So the Pol di Pizzoli was a private collection in the 19th century of Gian Giacomo Pol di Pizzoli and his mother, and it's basically a palazzo with many rooms and many amazing works of art. I remember seeing a work by some of my favorite Renaissance artists, including Botticelli. It was I was in that museum really much longer than I had been in any of the other places that I had been that day. So I spent a couple of hours there and then left the Pol di Pizzoli and headed back to the Piazza del Duomo. But what I did was something I had yet to do, and that is continued around to the side of the Piazza del Duomo and walked towards the castle on a traffic-free street called the Via Dante, which is a wonderful, wide thoroughfare that was turned into a pedestrian-only place to spend the day. It was wonderful with stores and gelato places and restaurants and cafes. And I remember there was an English bookstore, which I spent some time in, and I sat at a cafe and had a Prosecco, and I did not have dinner there that particular time. When Laura and I eventually went back to Milan together, we spent time, in fact, even having dinner, I believe, in one of the outdoor cafes. In fact, I actually had dinner that last night, the second night in Milan, back at the hotel in the Piazza. So I walked up and down the Via Dante, back to the hotel where I had something to eat at the outdoor pizzeria. I then went back into the Piazza del Duomo. It was the early evening, still did not want to go back to my room, and spent my last couple of hours at the Piazza del Duomo before returning to the hotel. So all of my sightseeing was in that very small area that you're now looking at. And this is a very nice idea. You're in Milan for a couple of nights and maybe a day and a half that I was in Milan. And these are some of the places you could go, and they're very interesting. There are many, many other places in Milan you could visit. You could see from the map that at the top of the map, there's a Galleria d'Arte Moderna, which means a modern art museum. Going in the other direction, to the opposite corner on the lower left-hand side, is a science and technology museum. There are many things you could do in Milan. These are the ones I chose that day. And I believe when I went back to Milan with Laura, we did some very similar things as that. And it became kind of, over the next 10 years, a routine that I would always go to these various locations and spend time in these places. And that is my tour of Milan. Not really a tour, but a day and a half in Milan. I believe the best part of the tour is that everything is contained in that small area that you saw on the map. And, if you don't like to take public transportation and you don't want to drive and you want to just get to your hotel, and there are, many hotels in that area that you could stay in, especially off the Via Dante. But that's, the perfect way of spending time, even more than a day and a half, in Milan with those things that I suggested. Um, Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again real soon. Until then, buonanotte e buona fortuna.